And actually, we will also have Adam Hecht joining us. He works with me at Operative and is very closely tied into a lot of the things that Operative is doing on the programmatic side with publishers, so he'll be adding some good color there. And at the very end, we will open it up for some Q&A, and you can ask questions to me about the study, to Bill about what he's up to and his thoughts, or to Adam, who's going to be the expert on all things Operative. So first and foremost, let's dive into the findings from the recently published white paper called The Future of Programmatic. It's really for publishers. We only surveyed publishers. We surveyed hundreds and told the 85 publisher executives who replied from what we would call premium publishers, those that are of a certain size. I think it was 5 million uniques annually or average monthly, and of a certain scale in terms of their business. And so what we have is really a comprehensive set of insights from the leaders of the digital publishing industry and really where we're going to be going in the future. And what we saw overall is that, for better or worse, publishers are betting on the future of programmatic. So the first bar at the top here, we asked how strongly publishers agreed if RTB is the future of their digital advertising business. And as you can see, any of the cool colors would be that they're either neutral or they agree. And you have nearly, 2/3 saying that they think RTB is the future of their digital advertising business. And then we asked how many would agree that programmatic premium is the future of their digital advertising business. And you can see that a much larger percentage, actually about 80%, were either neutral or agreed. And in both cases, you have about half agreeing or strongly agreeing that programmatic is the future. So you really have a very small set of advertisers who are totally disagreeing that programmatic is part of their future. So it is important for us to embrace programmatic. Publishers of all types, particularly premium publishers, have really tried a lot of different things already, but obviously there's a long way to go, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first place where there's a long way to go is with revenue. Publishers are really not earning very much yet from programmatic. So if we look at these two charts one at a time, on the left side, we ask what percentage of your digital revenue comes from premium programmatic, programmatic direct, automated guarantee, or other private forms of programmatic advertising. And you see there's definitely a slice there, about 15% have nothing in that channel at all. And then by far the largest chunk, say less than 5%, is being earned through these premium programmatic channels. So despite the fact that they're very bullish about the future, publishers today are really not earning very much from programmatic. This is not totally surprising. Programmatic is reasonably new. It's really reached the mainstream only in the last 2 to 3 years. And it takes a completely different set of tools, technologies, processes, and skills to master. So certainly it's not a bad thing that people aren't earning very much yet, but it does show that we have a long way to go before we've reached maturity with programmatic, premium and direct. Similarly, if you look at the chart on the right-hand side, we ask what percentage of your digital revenue comes from programmatic media on the open exchange. Here, we had about the same chunk that said nothing, and a slightly smaller but still sizable chunk saying less than 5%. And so what we're seeing is that there is a slightly higher amount of revenue being earned on the exchange. So for example, if you see the 50% or more, you really do have a decent minority of advertisers who have gone all in on the exchange. So while there really is not a huge percentage being earned by almost any publisher on programmatic direct, a very small slice saying 50% or more, there is a sizable chunk, again, a minority chunk of publishers who have gone all in with programmatic on the exchange. However, the majority are still in the single digits and have a long way to go. So we interviewed several different publishers to get some additional color outside of the survey that we did. And this quote is from Jeff Burkett, and I think it's a really important thing for us to think about as I go into the next couple of slides. He said, premium and automated guaranteed have a lot of promise for our industry, but there is much more work needed in order to accomplish the true goal of efficiency and automation. Today, many programmatic IOs still require the same amount of manual work as business through the traditional channels. When I talked to Jeff about this, he was talking in particular about programmatic direct and programmatic premium, where you have a direct seller who has a whole new set of technologies and processes to go through in order to enable a programmatic premium buy, typically one that's audience targeted. And the company is basically doing it because they, again, believe that it is the future of their business, but there are still a lot of hoops to go through before that deal can be put together, which are the things that the industry has to work to improve. And that's not the only issue that publishers are experiencing when they are trying to accomplish any sort of deal on a programmatic channel. Today, publishers experience a double whammy of increased complexity and decreased CPMs. So we asked publishers to tell us what the biggest problems facing their programmatic business today were, and by far the biggest problems are low CPM, followed by the manual labor that Jeff had mentioned in the quote earlier. But I think it's something that I'll be talking with Bill about later. Not every publisher has the same issue with low CPMs, but more than half are saying that it's their biggest problem. Notably, when you look at a yield curve, you start with, your premium inventory that is sold directly, and then you move to programmatic direct, which is maybe your audience targeted inventory, and then at the bottom you have your sometimes called long tail or unreserved inventory that goes out onto the exchange. That's sort of a typical yield curve that publishers have. There's a big jump down between those three blocks of inventory and CPM. And, a lot of advertisers say, well, it shouldn't be that way. It's my same audience. Why is it so low? And there are many reasons why that, the industry touts. So there are viewability issues on the exchange, fraud. A lot of times advertisers are worried about extension buys. So a publisher will have partnerships with networks. And so the inventory on the exchange is not necessarily on the publisher's website. All of these things swirling around being talked about make media buyers and advertisers nervous, and they spend less. So publishers have had to do a lot of heavy lifting to remove themselves from those conversations, going all in with viewability, going all in on quality metrics, making sure that it's very clear what their product catalog offers and that it's on their website or that it's premium content. To counteract some of these issues, but certainly they still abound. In addition to low CPMs and manual labor, not surprisingly, they say they're earning low revenue. We saw that with the other question that we asked. And right after that is viewability. So viewability is a conversation that we have frequently with publishers who are trying to figure out what standard can I use with viewability so that I'm not doing something different for every single advertiser that I work with. But viewability on the programmatic side is certainly not today just a switch that you can flip, although people are definitely looking for it to make that much easier as well. Part of the problem with programmatic is that it is not baked into the regular sales process for a lot of advertisers. Every publisher company is experimenting with a different way to sell programmatic. So we asked, how does your company sell programmatic today? And what we found was it's really all over the map. So the largest chunk said that their regular sales team sells all programmatic inventory. And this is actually good, and I think it's an improvement from the last few years. The regular sales team selling programmatic inventory means that the sales team has been trained, they know what is actually on the exchange, and they're compensated for it so they don't push it and hurt it. This tends to increase and improve CPM, and because sellers are relatively vocal, it tends to also help push along better process and operations, and actually bring it into the mainstream process and operations of the direct sold business, which tends to be the larger business. We had about a quarter say that they have a specialist team who sells and manage open exchange and private auction programmatic separately from the sales team. Excuse me. And this popular option has pros and cons. Certainly, if inventory is very different on the exchange and what's being sold is potentially totally different than what the seller is going to be selling, that's fine. But you do find in these scenarios where they're totally separate teams that they can conflict with one another. The salesperson has trouble with yield management and understanding what inventory is available. And there can also be issues with compensation where the salespeople don't feel that it's fair if a deal is sold that they could have sold, but it is sold through another channel. There's about a quarter that relies on sell-side platforms, and the issue here that we hear frequently is the ad tech tax. So I don't know how much I could be making if I sold it myself. I don't know how much Rubicon and PubMatic are keeping for themselves, or if I do, I don't know if it's fair. I don't feel like I'm in control of my audience. Those are all different things that we hear from clients that rely very heavily on third parties. That being said, it does take a lot of the heavy manual labor out of the equation. So there are pros and cons to that. And the smallest place said that their regular digital sales team sells private and guaranteed, but a separate team manages RTB. And this to me represents a happy medium in some ways, but still maybe not as good as having the sales team sell everything. This is sort of the scenario that Jeff Burkett had been mentioning, where the sales team does a lot of heavy lifting to get the premium and private deals through, and it takes them a lot of time to do so, but they really haven't been empowered to sell everything yet. And that being said, publishers are not mature with optimization either. So while they're still figuring out the best sales model, they're also figuring out how to best improve their CPMs with optimization. Less than 30% of publishers optimize programmatic revenue sources today in any automated way. So we asked, how do you optimize your exchange-traded RTB revenue today? Less than 50%, but the largest number, about 45%, said that their internal team updates their revenue sources manually with the waterfall approach. So certainly not ideal, but better than not doing anything, which is the next most popular option. So more than a quarter said that they do not optimize their sources and just have fixed placements. So this certainly provides preference to whoever's at the top of the waterfall there. Some people, in fact, said that they used an external automated optimization solution, which is great. So a little less than 20%, or about 1 in 6, said that they actually have an automated solution. And then about 1 in 5 said that they use an internally created optimization solution. Again, that's great. We also had about 10% that said that they're trying header bidding. So if you add it all up, there really are sort of a majority of people using the waterfall approach, doing things internally, doing them manually, trying to figure out how to optimize effectively. There are new companies that have popped up, companies like Stack, for example, that help with some of the management. Operative helps with a lot of the management on the back end, but a lot of companies are still trying to figure out what model works for them. Header bidding is an interesting conversation that a lot of people have asked Operative to be part of. So we've had a couple of different conversations on webinars and in person about header bidding. You have Google, which allows you to basically flip the switch and have header bidding. And then many other companies, including companies like AppNexus, PubMatic, who are offering header bidding tags that you can put in your header to compete with Google. And it's really a matter of how effectively can you manage those tags. Are you housing them in such a way where you can turn them off if they delay your pages? And are you doing it in such a way where it doesn't hurt your ability to direct sell something when you need to? So header bidding, some people have called risky. I think it depends on how comfortable you are with having something in your header, but also how comfortable you are with just the manual labor of optimizing over time across the different sources that you're working with. But it is a place where a lot of publishers are going because they feel like it's an easy way to bring programmatic and direct closer together to increase CPMs to get the best price for the impression upfront. And it's not always a problem to be working with programmatic today. It's not always low CPMs. It's not always manual labor issues. In fact, that chunk that said that they're going all programmatic is represented here by Christian Basler, who's the president of Power Excel Media. So he said, we found that social and mobile are our most profitable channels and have leaned into them. We've gotten to a point where about 70% of our traffic is mobile. and he partners with a programmatic rep firm that can help them customize deals. In this way, they command good CPMs without having to manage a sales team. So Bauer doesn't even have a direct sales team. They've used programmatic only and feel that it works really well for them. But in fact, I think it's because they have a unique audience and they have something relatively valuable in the fact that it's social and mobile. So advertisers, I think, that are looking for something special can find it on programmatic channels, but it has to be well lit. Publishers that have long tail that is, not well diversified from other things that are available online are going to have the biggest problems with CPM. Publishers are bullish on improving programmatic, which is great. So we really looked at a bunch of different features and functions that go into programmatic and asked publishers to indicate what extent they plan to increase the use of these things by the next year. And there were some things that a decent chunk of publishers plan to do. So about 40% said that they were going to be doing programmatic through SSPs and open exchanges. They're going to be increasing that. A little bit more actually said they're going to increase their use of private auctions, and automated guaranteed actually is popular. So definitely both RTB and the more premium private programmatic options are going to be increased by a chunk of publishers next year. Programmatic optimization by far the most popular. So, looking at the numbers, not a majority today, looks like it might be a majority next year that are in some way trying to optimize their programmatic channels. Yield management, reasonably popular, certainly something that is more difficult when you have a variety of channels that you're selling across, so something that publishers should pay attention to. And, that is really the conclusion of the findings and the lead-in to what I think is the more exciting half of the webinar, which is my conversation with Bill and Adam. So I just want to have Bill and Adam introduce themselves before I ask my first question. Bill, I'm going to start with you. So welcome, and why don't you give us a quick description of what you do for Scripps?
Sure. Hey, Emily. Thanks for having me. I'm Bill Murray. I'm the Vice President of Sales Planning and Strategy here at Scripps Networks. I'm responsible for programmatic revenue, but also ad operations, ad products, pricing and planning, and yield management.
Great. Quite a long list. And Adam, can you let us know what you do for Operative?
Sure. I am Vice President of Monetization at Operative. I am responsible for consulting with our clients across all our product lines about monetizing on both the open exchange or really any indirect sold capabilities.
Great. Thanks a lot. Okay, so Bill, my first question is for you, and it's really a lay of the land kind of question. Would you please just describe for the rest of the audience what Scripps is doing for programmatic? So what's their general approach, and how does it fit into your overall digital advertising business?
Sure. Yeah, I think that the answer to that question has evolved quite a bit over the last few years. I think the place we are now, we really just look at it as another sales channel that kind of allows advertisers to access our inventory or audiences differently and in a lot of cases more efficiently. And I think it's been very beneficial because oftentimes while we're selling very similar products, we're accessing either buying teams or different budgets that we may not have been able to access through our existing channels.
Gotcha. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the breakout between RTB and programmatic direct. Do you do anything differently with those?
Yeah, definitely. So we participate actively in both. I think, like a lot of the publishers that responded to the survey, so the majority of our revenue is coming from either an open exchange or a private marketplace type environment. We have had some success and have been early participants with programmatic guaranteed or programmatic direct. But I think that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on the systems that we're going to have to transact through. And advertisers and publishers still have, kind of a long way to go to really get comfortable with putting so much of our revenue through those platforms.
Gotcha. I'm actually going to ask you to dive in a little bit there. So what would be some of the main things that need to be improved upon for this to be easier for you guys or more effective?
Sure. So in programmatic direct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's and so we work with a few different vendors here, and that's kind of a hard question to answer because the core of the problem is that a lot of those campaigns are actually more difficult than if we go through our normal I/O process. Mm-hmm. The systems simply aren't mature enough to handle a lot of the kind of components of automation that we're expecting out of them, and that the vendors are as well. Like, we're still early in the game. But simple things like if mid-flight I want to go through and adjust the number of impressions that I need to deliver. Some of the vendors actually have you go in and you have to stop a line, rebuild it, and start again with a new impression count. Well, like that's a problem that was solved, 10 years ago through kind of normal delivery channels. So we're actually reintroducing a lot of the complexities that we, have overcome in the normal process with programmatic direct. Again, like I'm betting very heavily on it. Like, it's something that we're definitely we're investing a lot of time in, at least in working with our vendors. It's something that we're actively discussing with advertisers. So we believe in the promise of it. There are just some technical issues that need to be worked out.
Makes sense. So that being said, with the manual labor that can be involved, maybe you could give me an understanding of your programmatic team. How big? What do they do? Are they doing the right things? Do you want them to do better, different things? Let's hear about that.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if we're doing it right, but I'll give you a sense of what we're doing. So we have, right now, including me, we have 4 people. I'm really responsible for handling our vendor relationships. So if we want to go out and partner with a new SSP, if we're evaluating a header bidding technology, I'm usually the one that'll handle those discussions. We have one seller, and she is responsible for a few things. She's responsible for coordinating with our national sales team, our direct sales team, and she's there almost as kind of a support person for them when they're having conversations that might include programmatic. She's also responsible for managing the relationships between us and the DSPs or trading desks because we view them very much as clients. I also have an account manager who's then responsible for kind of managing the day-to-day relationships, any type of reporting or troubleshooting questions, and then I have one analyst. And the analyst there, he's responsible for managing price floors, helping us evaluate whether there are either data or inventory segments that seem to be getting an unusual amount of demand, where we might be able to set up a private marketplace. Generally just like a revenue manager.
So do they operate as a sort of a team within themselves, or do they sit in those separate functions? So the analyst sits with your other analyst, the operations person sits on the other, the broader operations team, or is it like a little pod?
It is actually a pod. So it's a pod, but when I went through my introduction, my team, we're not isolated. We are, while they certainly do again operate in a pod. It's my seller she interacts more with the national sales team probably than she does with me, and I'd say the account manager, I think in that case she does interact very directly with the clients, and that's primarily what she does. The programmatic analyst actually sits right next to the person that's responsible for yield management here at Script. And so while there's a separate kind of reporting structure, I think the daily interactions are certainly kind of across groups.
Great, gotcha. Adam, I'd love to hear from you, having worked with many different publishers at this point. Does that sound similar? Do you see other models that work as well?
So that's pretty familiar across the, I guess, you referred to them earlier as premium publishers, and I think that's really what I see across that level in the enterprise folks, right? But I've also seen a number of other strategies work, especially with folks who maybe have a very small or even practically non-existent direct sales team, they still have quote-unquote salespeople working with the programmatic and the yield management team if they want to take advantage of programmatic direct. And I think that there is no real way to separate programmatic direct from more, and I hesitate to use the word traditional with digital, but more traditional digital sales, because ultimately programmatic direct is this interesting hybrid between a guaranteed sale and a non-guaranteed sale, and whoever is working on behalf of the publisher with the advertisers and the agencies needs to be able to speak the language of both the guaranteed sale and the non-guaranteed programmatic direct sale.
Got it. Makes sense. So, Bill, when you look at, from the outside, how do you decide which programmatic middlemen or vendor partners to work with? How many? Who? What are some of the factors when you're evaluating these guys?
Sure. So the first thing that we do is I'm going to go back a couple years. So the first thing that we did is we tried to evaluate how many we thought we needed. And the way that we did that, quite honestly, was we started adding them and adding them and adding them until we felt like we had achieved enough partners where we had an appropriate amount of demand against our inventory, right? Because, a lot of these guys have, their demand curves actually drop pretty precipitously if you're talking about CPM. Like they have, a very small number of people that they'll tell you pay a $50 CPM. The reality is they have, maybe I'm making these numbers up, but 20% of them will pay above, $5. And then you get this precipitous drop into this, long tail, right? So the more that you work with, ideally, you'd be able to push that kind of, whatever that CPM curve out further to the right. And so we tried to do that because it really helped us kind of gauge the value that the market, perceived of our inventory. And so I don't know how to, there's certainly no equation that I've come up with that would say, how to determine the appropriate number of vendors. But for us, it was we had limitations, obviously, in the size of our group. We can only manage so many relationships. We, added vendors until we kind of saw maybe a diminishing return on CPM and fill rate, right? Because then you're also, the more vendors you work with, then you start getting into issues with things like, vendors passing back to each other and, page latency that ads are truly inflicting. But so we did that. We actually took a platform-by-platform approach, actually. We certainly work with a few vendors that have, I think, pretty good cross-platform programmatic capabilities. But I also, respect the fact that there are mobile-only SSPs that are very good at what they do, that have great relationships with marketers and get, I think, very good access to those budgets. And so we did it originally with desktop, and we moved into mobile. And then most recently now, we're actually starting to work with native-specific programmatic vendors, as well as actually email or newsletter programmatic vendors.
Got it. So really branching out channel by channel, not just the big platform guys.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, I'd have one partner that could just work across everything. It's just not, for us, for our situation, it just doesn't work. It just hasn't seemed to work out as well. And when we started bringing on some of these platform-specific partners, we started seeing some pretty immediate gains from doing that.
Gotcha. So Adam, again, I think comparing this to what you see, is there a magic number for a lot of publishers for how many different partners to work with, or how do you decide how to optimize across different revenue sources?
So I think Bill's point about platform specific is really, really important because you have to remember a lot of these vendors do rely on their own relationships with the demand side, right? And who brings what agencies to the table and which buyers. So what I found is anywhere from 3 to 5 dedicated platforms per dedicated demand sources per platform is generally a good number, with the 5 being, for where you have the most inventory. So for most publishers, I would say they are display heavy, and that's where they would really get the benefit of having, between 4 and 5 partners. For video, probably a different story, where I think maybe 2 or 3 is best, but the most important point is to split it up by platform, as Bill said, and really start looking at vendors for what they can bring to the platform that you're looking to sell programmatically through.
Gotcha. So be that mobile or video or whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
Gotcha. So Bill, obviously, you have a reasonably mature programmatic situation right now at Scripps. You guys have premium video inventory. I'm guessing a decent chunk of it sells out for your direct channels. How do you decide what to on the various programmatic revenue streams? So what, is it just anything that's audience targeted? Is it anything that doesn't get sold by direct? How do you split that out?
Yeah, so today it's really is what doesn't get sold by direct. I think that the conversation, because we do sell out at a very high percentage in almost every. But I think what we're looking at now, I think audience targeting is a possibility for us in the future. I think for me, though, the one that's most clear is programmatic guaranteed. If somebody just wants to leverage the programmatic channel for the workflow efficiencies and still get access to the inventory. Again, it's really no different than kind of the existing reservation process that we have in place. But I would be talking again specifically about like programmatic guaranteed where a reservation is occurring.
Gotcha. And how do you handle that with the direct sales team? So is there a compensation model that works for them so they don't feel that programmatic is encroaching on their ability to sell? Is there a date that, okay, this is the cutoff if you haven't sold by, the first of the month, it goes to programmatic channels? Are you more flexible than that? How do you guys deal with all that?
Yeah, we always engage our national sales team. So even if we have a vendor that comes and brings us a potential deal, we'll actually reach out to our direct seller, engage them so that we can collectively have the conversation. We do compensate our national sellers for programmatic activity. We're super sensitive to this idea that programmatic could be, or even this programmatic team could be encroaching on business that they manage, and so I think we maybe in some cases over communicate even with those folks. But yeah, look, what I'm talking about here, I think when I'm talking about programmatic guaranteed, those are the types of transactions that I actually am expecting and that we're training our national sales team to have. I think more of the private marketplace conversations, definitely, any type of open exchange conversations, even though they're more limited, that we have, like, that's really where this programmatic team gets involved. But when we're talking about these guaranteed deals that are just, transacting through the automated channels, I think that is with the exception of like educating an agency or on how the platform operates, those are conversations that we expect our national team to have.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how do you guys work out pricing? I mean, are you just hoping for the best and looking at ways to optimize as the pricing, the bids come in, or do you feel like you're setting floors effectively and creating a market for what you have?
Yes. So I think that, we're not hoping. I'm always hoping, but I think that the team actually knows what they're doing. When we went into this, I think one of the big concerns was that, the brands that my company represents, right? Food Network, HGTV, Travel Channel, DIY, like these are brands that people hold sacred inside of the Scripps walls. And I think that they believe that they are valuable to our users and our marketers, and not just the impressions, but, the audiences and everything else. And so there was a big concern that if we started investing heavily in programmatic, then we were going to somehow devalue that inventory. And so we did go in initially, I think, very conservatively with how we were managing floors. We priced our floors very aggressively. And what ended up happening, kind of the strategy that we took, is that as we started to add more of these demand sources, and there was increased competition against this fixed set of inventory, then we were able to relax the floors a bit because, as I mentioned, that yield curve pushed out to the right as we were able to get access to more of the more advertisers willing to pay high CPMs from a number of different vendors. And so, yeah, I mean, there's nothing unusual here. I mean, look, we figure out like how scarce is the inventory that we're trying to sell, what's the demand look like against it, and what's the market feedback, how much are people actually willing to pay, and then we actively monitor all of those, all those kind of components, and that's how we determine things like seasonal pricing models, or day of week, or even time of day models, or industry models, and we try to actively manage the floors that we have set so that we can, take advantage of times when there might be, lower sell-through and increased demand from programmatic. So that's kind of what we do.
So Adam, how does that compare to some of the other pricing practices that you've seen? Is that pretty typical? Are there other ways that publishers are trying to maximize their CPMs?
I mean, honestly, in the breadth of what I see, that is very atypical. I've come across a lot of folks who are almost, I hesitate to use the word afraid, but hesitant to price their inventory where they feel it should be. And I think that has a lot to do with the reputation of real-time bidding and the reputation of programmatic in general as this sort of clearinghouse for remnant, when ultimately it really is the same inventory that you're selling directly. So if you're confident in your inventory, and you're confident in your website, and you're confident in your brand, then there's no real reason to not price your inventory aggressively, regardless of the sales channel. So what I see a lot of is testing the waters at a lower floor and then trying to bump up, when in reality I think a more effective strategy is sort of what Bill described as starting aggressive, and then, depending on time of day, time of year, even taking buy cycles into consideration, bumping certain floor prices down for certain inventory, but keeping the rest of it at that premium level.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So my last question is really about optimization over time. So Bill, you had mentioned you guys have some header bidding in place and that you're pretty comfortable with that. What are some of the ways that you're maximizing your yield across your different revenue sources right now, and where do you want to go with that? How do you feel like you can improve upon that?
Yeah, again, I think, we're constantly testing things. So, there's kind of everybody on the team understands that, if we want to try something and we have we feel like we've done enough due diligence to make sure that we're not going to, lose a lot of money, we should always feel comfortable going in and trying new things. As far as actually optimizing the inventory, look, I guess it's an ongoing process. Like, it's something that we go in and we're evaluating something different every day. It's not something that we feel comfortable with our seasonal model today and we just set it and we don't ever go and look back at it. We'll go and, we'll expect, again, maybe for around the holidays, we expect a spike in demand and a decline in supply during the holidays. We'll kind of model out what we expect. We'll adjust the floor rates. We'll let it run. As soon as it ends, we'll go back. We'll reevaluate it, and we'll adjust the model for the next, holiday or spike that's coming up. I do. So you mentioned header bidding. we're really going to give this thing a shot because I think it does a couple of things. It makes the idea of it makes it easier for us to optimize rates and make a more level playing field, right? For everybody that's using enhanced dynamic allocation from Google, I think that this is actually a way to give your other partners an opportunity to compete on the same level as them. I think that it's a great way for us to really encourage that price competition to exist between our different partners. And so that is what right now we're in the process. You and I had a discussion. We should be deploying our actual header bidding solution, which will contain the majority of the partners that we work with. It'll actually contain their code so that they'll all be bidding out of the same wrapper solution effectively.
Got it. So Adam, last question for you before we open it up to questions from the audience. And before I ask it, I just want to mention to everybody that in the GoToWebinar control panel, there's an area for questions. Feel free to type them in there, and I will read them aloud. And if it's specific to me or Adam or Bill, just let me know in the question itself. Thanks. So Adam, speaking of header bidding, I mean, are there pros and cons that you want to mention to what Bill has said, just for the sake of other models that you've seen?
Sure. So header bidding has, for the most part, eliminated what I always thought was the biggest con, and that was page latency. And with the advent of container tags or wrappers, they've really done, the vendors have really done a great job at making sure that publisher page load is taken into consideration. So instead of it, potentially breaking the page or just increasing, you can actually set caps now on the latency. That was a big step forward and eliminated a lot of the trepidation that I encountered in the industry when I would talk to publishers about header bidding. That said, I still think there are opportunities for incremental revenue that exist either below the headers and above where AdX would bid for that inventory. And unfortunately, that still relies on a ton of manual labor to optimize those lines and make sure they're actually competing at a fair level if the header bidders don't win the impressions, but publishers still want to see if they can compete against AdX in the general auction. So there's still work to be done, but I think header bidding has come a very long way in a very short time. And I'm pretty bullish on where it's going.
So this question, I think, could be for either of you guys, but maybe Adam, you could answer it for the general marketplace. Somebody asked about header bidding. Is it considered just for the exchanges, or is there any sort of header bidding that you can do for programmatic direct?
So and this is Adam, by the way, I've seen header bidding used exclusively for private marketplace deals, and that's so the agencies in question can get true first look at the inventory before it even gets to the ad server. That's pretty much the extent that I've seen it used. Bill, I don't know if you're planning on using it in any way like that, or I've seen it used in any other way.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. We've had a number of agencies that have been interested in implementing their own header bidding solution. This initial run that we're going out with is more incorporating the folks that are more actively bidding or representing a number of advertisers, not just a specific agency, but more like an SSP that just happens to have a header tag.
Great, got it. Okay. So, Bill, there's a question here for you. It said, for programmatic and programmatic direct, are your insertion orders being booked directly into your ad server, or do you book them through Operative and push them to the ad server?
So for programmatic direct, they would be, it would actually book directly into our ads. As it stands now, it would be booked directly in the ad server, and we would have to input into Operative. So that's part of that manual process that we're expecting will adjust over time. Any of the private marketplace deals that we're establishing, we build those ourselves in our vendor platform, and we actually manage that revenue right now outside of Operative.
Got it. Okay. And Adam, do you have anything to add there? Are publishers doing things differently than that, or is that pretty standard?
Well, I've seen publishers book, programmatic direct campaigns in Operative, mainly as a way to keep all of the revenue information and reconciliation information under one roof. So I've seen it absolutely done both ways.
Got it. Okay. So Bill, this is also for you. Could you describe, are you using a traditional waterfall, or are there some automated optimization solutions that you're using?
No, yeah, for the most part, we're using a traditional waterfall. I think the exceptions would be, we do have some partners that, based on price, we will allow to bid ahead of reserved lines, assuming that there's enough inventory available. But outside of that, yeah, we do actually right now still use more of the waterfall approach. We think with header bidding, we're going to start moving away from that a little bit more. But so far, with the number of resources that we have and the amount of effort that we can just physically put into it, it's been the most manageable solution for us.
Gotcha. Great. Okay. I do have one more question here, which is on pricing. It says, how do you figure out the best prices on the open exchange? And I guess maybe going back to floors, maybe talk about how do you determine where to start with your floors, or where to start with what you think fair market value would be?
Yeah, well, look, so initially the way we did it is, we don't price in isolation for programmatic. We work with the larger pricing and planning and yield management teams to understand, what the direct market is willing to pay. Like they obviously, there's a certain value when they're executing these direct IOs. Now, some of that value might be tied up in the fact that they get to reserve it and nobody else gets access to it, but it still, I think, directionally should give you a sense of what marketers are willing to pay. From there, we work backwards and just say, kind of like Adam referenced, we started out with high floors and worked our way down. We also were very reliant on the guidance that was given to us by our vendors. I mean, they have a view of the entire market. All I can see is what people think, Scripps inventory is worth. They get to see what marketers think the marketplace is worth. And so, we worked with them to kind of reconcile what our expectations were with what advertisers were willing to spend in the market. And again, it really is just kind of this active management thing. I mean, I'll have people internally that'll come and ask me, how much is this audience worth in a 300 by 250? It really depends on what day of the week they're talking about. Definitely, what month they're talking about. Our values fluctuate with what the market says. But I guess my initial advice, if you're starting out, would be start out somewhere close to what your direct sales team is selling for, and then work yourself down, discuss it with your, with your vendors, and see. You'll get a sense where your fill rates and your CPMs will kind of align to a value that's probably something you'll feel good about.
Great. Well, thank you both very much. I think this was super informative, and certainly the conversation brought a lot of color to what we learned in our findings from the survey. So if any of you have additional questions, feel free to let us know. So you can contact me at eriley@witstrategy.com, and feel free to download the white paper. Just go to operative.com/future, and you'll be able to see all of the additional findings that I didn't have a chance to present today. So again, thanks to Bill and Adam, and thanks to all of you for dialing in. Have a great day.